Hello, everyone. This is David with Let's Talk Theology. I want to thank you for joining us in this podcast. Thank you for visiting our YouTube page. I really appreciate it. I know you didn't have to watch, you don't have to listen, but you chose to do so anyway, and I'm eternally grateful for it. Again, we're just simply an advocate for biblical education and theological discussion, and we're looking to help anybody who is interested, anybody who needs the help. We're looking to help you study the Bible more and help you study it in a more comprehensive way. And that's the only reason for these videos. There's far more people more educated and more capable than I am. But if someone can get something out of these videos, I believe that it will serve its purpose. So thank you for watching. And I hope you get something out of it. Hope you would subscribe, follow us on Instagram, follow us on Twitter at Talk Theology. Follow us on SoundCloud at Let's Talk Theology Podcast. We're also on Instagram with the username Let's Talk Theology. All right, so enough of that. Thank you for bearing with me while we get that information out. We want to continue our talk in the 15-minute Bible study, and this may be a little longer than 15 minutes. I'm not sure. I just try to keep it at 15 minutes so that we can break it up as needed. Now, in the previous 15-minute Bible study, we went over the differences between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. As we stated in the last podcast and last video, the common concept that Genesis 2 is only a elaboration of Genesis 1, we are looking at that. And I want to look at that because there are some very distinct, very large differences between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. And the reason for those differences is that Moses is writing this record, this history, to portray to the nation of Israel as they enter into the promised land, how they resemble the initial institution of God in creation through Adam. Okay, Adam was not just the first man as we commonly would like to assume, but Adam was a chosen man. He was a man that was to represent God, and he was to build a family that would represent God. One of the greatest distinctions and one of the greatest or the obvious attributes of Adam is that it says God breathed into Adam, meaning he was not only in the likeness and the image of God, but specifically Adam. He was breathed into. God breathed into him the breath of life. And again, he is the only individual that is distinctively and purposely acknowledged as the figure of the one to come, that one to come being Jesus Christ. And that's represented in Paul's doctrine in Romans chapter 5. So all of these things are indicative to who Adam was and the role that he played, simply because as Israel is entering into the promised land, God is revealing to them that he's using them in the same way that he used Adam, but under different circumstances. Now, before Adam fell, God put him in the garden. The garden was a sanctuary. It was a temple. It was a place where sacrifices were made. And when we say sacrifices is simply work. Okay, and I want to show you that in a few moments, that sacrifices is simply obedient work under the obedience and the law and commandment of God. Okay, he offered work in the garden, and he was the representative of God in the earth. He was the image, the likeness, and the breath of God in the earth. God used him to bring about and to initiate the coming of Jesus Christ. Again, if we only look at the coming of Jesus Christ as a response to the fall of Adam, we miss the purpose and the essence of Jesus' coming. The ultimate purpose and the intentional purpose of Jesus' coming is to reveal his glory, reveal the Father's glory in the earth, reveal the totality of his glory in the earth by being the only begotten Son. Now, there's a difference between Adam and Jesus Christ, because Adam is simply the shadow, but Jesus is the real thing. And I like to use this example so much because it actually explains perfectly what I'm saying. Imagine, and we all, especially us down here in the South, we have this thing called the flea market, where there's a lot of used goods. There's a lot of, underpriced goods. We can say it that way. And a lot of times, a lot of those things are not authentic. If we can be quite honest, a lot of it is, a copy of the real thing. Well, what we face a lot of times is many people like to take Adam, who is simply the copy. He's simply the washed down version of the one who was to come. I want you to understand that Adam wasn't it. He wasn't the man. He was simply a copy, an image. He was a reflection of who was to come. But when the real thing, the real one came, then he was to be most glorious. He was to be the one that would reveal the totality of the Creator. And Adam was built and was created and put in the garden for that purpose. Now, of course, he wasn't the totality of Jesus Christ, but he carried certain attributes to point to the one that would come after him. Yes, he was a regular man, but he was a chosen man, and he actually obtained something that none of us obtained. He was the one to which God breathed into his nostrils. He was the one to which was sinless from birth. He chose sin, unlike all of the rest of us. He was in the category of life with the Father. These are certain attributes that none of us can say we will ever have, and no other man will have these attributes, because every man since his fall was born into sin. All right. So Adam was a pretty unique guy. He was a pretty powerful guy in his time, so much so that the sin that he committed was imputed on all men. So we know that he was he was more than just a regular guy from the point of his influence and his imputation. All right, but let's go further. What we want to look at today is the responsibility and the role of Adam in the garden. Okay, I guess we can start here, Genesis chapter 2. And we want to look at verse number 15. It reads, "And the Lord God took the man and put him in the garden of Eden to dress it and to keep it." I'm reading from the King James Version. There's two words I want you to pay attention to: dress and keep. The word dress means to till the ground or work, or in a more modern term, cultivate. All right. And the word keep means to watch, to persevere, or to preserve rather, and to guard. All right. Now this is amazing, because whenever Adam was kicked out of the garden, what was the first thing that God did? He put two cherubims there to guard the garden, right? This is the thing we have to keep in mind. Common perception is that everybody and anyone could walk in and out of the garden. That's not what the picture is indicating in Genesis chapter 2. There's only one individual that God placed in the garden, and that was Adam. And whenever he created his wife, she was also welcome there as well. But we see no other indications that anyone else was able to come in and out of the garden. In fact, we see no indication that Adam was even able to come out of the garden. And I want you to think of it this way. Just as the Levites worked in the temple and preserved the work and the atmosphere that God desired in the temple, so was Adam to do in the garden. In fact, I want to show something that's something very important, very unique about how this concept parallels one another. Now, we're very familiar with Joshua chapter 24, verse number 14, which tells Joshua he was admonishing the people upon his death. And this is what he says. He says, "Now therefore fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in truth. Put away the gods which your fathers served on the other side of the flood and in Egypt, and serve ye the Lord." Now, there's a word I want you to pay attention to in this particular verse, and that's serve. Okay? The same word, Hebrew word for serve in this text is the same Hebrew word for dress in Genesis chapter 2, verse 15. It literally shows us within the proper contexts and then within the proper circumstances, Israel was doing the same thing that Adam was commanded to do in the garden. Okay? And so what we find is that the only differences is the circumstances that are surrounded around the fall of Adam and the sin that is now among all of mankind. But there is a very key point in all of this. God chose who he willed. He chose whoever he wanted to choose. And through them, he would work to bring about the Son of God, Jesus Christ, the Messiah of all creation. So when we look at the two stories, we have to look at it as if we're in the tent of the tribes that were scattered all across the wilderness and journeying to get to the promised land. And as they're journeying, God has given Moses these revelations to give to them so that they can understand their purpose when they get over there in the promised land. Because they were to have in their mind that just what Adam was doing in the garden, here we are in the promised land doing the same thing. Now, I want you to look at this. Adam was to keep the garden. That word keep means to guard, meaning he was not to let anything in and he was not to let anything out that didn't belong there. Now, this becomes very interesting whenever we read chapter 3, verse 1. Because as the guard of the garden, chapter 3, verse 1, chapter 3, verse 2, chapter 3, verse 3, chapter 3, verse 4, especially, should not have happened, because there was to be a guard in the garden to keep everything and anything in line, and everything and anything that's not supposed to be there outside of the garden. Now look at what it says here. Chapter 3, verse 1 says, "Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden." Isn't it amazing? Isn't it amazing that there's a serpent here talking to the woman, and it's not at all strange to her? The thing we have to look at is whenever God told Adam to have dominion over the fish of the sea, the fowl of the air, the beast, and all of the other animals and everything in the earth, he's given this command because the human race was responsible for keeping things in line in the earth and as well as in the garden. In the earth, humans were to keep things in line and subdue the earth and multiply. And in the garden, as the priest, because Adam was a type of priest, he was to make sure the sanctuary stayed the way God built it to exist. So when we find in the garden that the serpent is saying things contrary to the will of God and the commandment of God, what would be the natural and the right thing for Adam to do? The natural thing for Adam to do is to come and stop it, correct it, and abolish whatever is existing there, contrary to the will and the commandment of God. Well, now we understand why he says in chapter 3, verse 9, "Adam, where art thou?" I don't think that was a directly committed to the immediate "where are you now?" but it was almost a way of saying, where were you? Where were you whenever this device was going on in the garden, this transaction, this manipulation, this trickery? Where were you whenever this subtlety was going on in the garden? Because Adam was given the responsibility to not only cultivate and keep the garden, but to guard the garden, not just from, animals, but actually from what the animals may bring. And it makes me wonder why God gave them power over the animals, because here we see something very unusual. We have animals talking, and not just animals talking, but animals talking things contrary to its creator. It lets us know that the animals were subject to the obvious spirit, the obvious evilness, the obvious rebellion that was already existing before Adam fell. And now it was man's responsibility, particularly Adam, to dominate those attempts to persuade mankind to that which is contrary to God's commandment and will. And he failed at doing it. So here it is. He partook in the act of disobedience willfully, and mankind was forever doomed. There is a lot going on here. It makes everything that God commanded and instituted makes sense whenever we look at it from the perspective that Adam had the power and Adam had the right to keep things in line by obeying God in the garden. All right. So next week, or in the next lesson, it may not be a week, we're going to look at some things. We're going to look at what these animals were up to. What was the risk of not subduing the animals and the creatures as God commanded in the first chapter, and essentially in chapter 2 as well, whenever he instituted the animals in the garden. Because there's something about these animals that God knew would distract mankind from what he told them. And that's why he gave them power over all creeping things, over all the things in the earth. Because if they were not tamed, then they would thwart man from the will of God. And that's essentially what the whole dominion is all about. We're going to figure it out a little more and talk about it a little more in the next video. We're going to look at it a lot closer, and we're going to see exactly what dominion of Adam was all about. Until next time, continue to study, continue to follow us on Instagram, on YouTube, Twitter at Talk Theology, and on SoundCloud. Follow us as we follow Christ. Thank you for watching, and God bless.